Major news as we join you right here for our 30-minute special on WHAS 11+. The prosecution has rested its case in the trial of the decade, the murder mystery of Crystal Rogers. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Doug Prophet, WHAS 11 News. Testimony today revealed how Crystal Rogers was using her cell phone for the very last time on the last day that she was seen. Plus, new details about Joseph Lawson's potential involvement in the plot. We want to go right out to our Shay McAllister outside the Warren County courtroom in Bowling Green. And Shay, after the prosecution rested, the defense pushed the judge for a directed verdict. He denied it, but what he said next really upset people in that courtroom.
Absolutely, Doug. There is so much to get to here. First, I want to explain exactly what that directed verdict is. It's filed by defense attorneys, and it's when they are saying that the prosecution failed to present enough evidence that there's no need for the jury to deliberate because there's not even enough evidence for the jury to have something to consider. Both defense attorneys filed these motions, and ultimately both were denied. I'm going to bring in my colleague Alexandra Goldberg, who was also in the courtroom listening to this. So let's start with Brian Butler, Brooks Houck's attorney.
Right. So when Butler filed this motion, he argued that there needs to be proof of death. He said a strong quote. He said, "It's clear you have to have one of three things: body, crime scene, or confession. None of these exist in this case." And he brought up legal precedent from Kentucky criminal cases. He said that this case would go against 80 years of Kentucky law. So he brought up situations where someone was convicted on circumstantial evidence, but there was a body, a crime scene, or a confession here. He also said that all homicides have a body. There are very few convicted without. He also said that this is an extraordinary case. There was detectives, investigators, all working for 10 years to get evidence. It wasn't with a lack of trying. He said there was a lack of evidence.
So ultimately, Shane Young then has a chance to respond, and he does, coming off very strong, saying, well, we did have a witness. He's seated right there, and he points at Brooks Houck, looks him in the eye, and says, if you have enough time to prepare to kill someone, you have enough time to make sure there won't be a crime scene. He talks about how Brooks spent all day on that July 3rd, that Friday, at the Houck family farm preparing for what they were going to do. Shane says, what I have to prove is that there was an intention to kill someone and someone was killed, and I have proved that. It's so interesting. We have to mention, Alexandra, the jury's not hearing all of this.
Right.
This is the most straightforward that you're hearing either one of these attorneys talk throughout the entire trial, I would say, and then the judge too. But the jury's not hearing it.
Right, you said this was the most straightforward that we've heard the counsel, also the most straightforward that we've heard Judge Sims put this. He said, quote, there is certainly proof of death in this case. He points to a couple examples here. He said with the cadaver dogs sniffing out traces of human remains in Anna Whiteside's white Buick, what we've been talking about all day. He said that the fact that there was a strand of hair in the trunk there and that it was had properties similar to hairs found on Crystal Rogers' hairbrush. He also said that there was also no proof that Crystal ever left the farm that night on July 3rd.
And Judge Sims went on to say that there's a lot of facts in this case that are very problematic for Mr. Houck. And then we get this unique opportunity to kind of see into the judge's head to see what he's been taking notes on, how he's interpreted the evidence. And he does not mince words here. He says there's a date night that never occurred. He said there's a phone call with Steve Lawson where he asks a question of Crystal. Brooks says, I'm going to have to ask her and get back to you. But the judge says if she was alive, she would have been in that car and she would have taken the phone right there. He also talks about how Houck's whereabouts on July 3rd are very misleading. He claims to be doing all of these different things, but then witnesses got on the stand and said they were closed that day. They were out of town that day. They weren't talking to Brooks Houck that day. The judge talked about the co-conspirators, all of the testimony that puts Rosemary Houck and Nick Houck also in the mix here. He says that the car was clearly staged when it was left on the Bluegrass Parkway. He said no woman would ever leave their phone, purse, and keys in their vehicle like that. The judge also said that this was very problematic for him. He called it a softball question from the state police just a couple of weeks after Crystal disappears, State police say, Brooks, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And the judge says, you would think if the mother of your child is missing, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to you, or at least at the top of the list, and that he could not give an answer to that one. So for all of these reasons, the judge says, when you add up all of that, the court believes it'd be reasonable for a jury to find that Miss Rogers is deceased, which means the judge is going to let the jury decide on that one and not rule on it.
And I also want to add, it was an emotional response in the courtroom there. You could hear some pretty, loud wailing and sobbing from Crystal Rogers' family, hearing the judge mutter those words. And of course, that was all, in relation to Brooks Houck and Brian Butler. But Kevin Coleman, the attorney for Joseph Lawson, also had a chance to get up there and argue on behalf of his motion for acquittal. He had two different approaches here. One, he really argued that the interpretation of this conspiracy charge is hard to prove. He said, or he sort of hinted at, it's very rare for these conspiracy charges to come up at a state level. They're typically federal. He said, what is this conspiracy on? Conspiracy to move a body? Conspiracy to move a car? Conspiracy to commit murder? Sort of hinting at the vagueness and uncertainty there. He also said that to be found guilty in a conspiracy, you have to be an accomplice. And to be an accomplice, you have to share a mindset with the perpetrator. He said it is not the case in this situation. Shane Young, of course, comes back and says, well, there was a motive. It was that $50,000. Doug.
To the both of you, we're going to have a lot more questions for you coming right up in just a second. First, I want to remind you that with this case today, the prosecution resting its case, this case is really starting to speed up. You can stay up to date with the very latest. I invite you to follow our excellent WHAS 11 blog. It is written hour by hour, or when we're able to get updates from Shay and Alexander as they're able to lead the courtroom, by WHAS 11 digital journalist Joseph Garcia. It's how I follow the updates throughout the day, along with our legal analyst Nick Mudd. Remember, no cameras are allowed in the courtroom, so Shay and Alexandra are sharing their very lengthy, detailed notes from the proceedings, and Joseph Garcia is taking those notes and putting them right on our website and a blog right on the front page of WHAS11.com. Stay up to date with the very latest, as this case has now had a major turn. Well, WHAS 11 News legal analyst Nick Mudd has been with us more than a year following this case. Nick is also a former prosecutor with the Violent Crimes Unit in Louisville, so he sees it from both sides, the defense side and the prosecution side. Were you stunned that the prosecution rested its case today, and have they done enough, in your opinion?
I was, Doug. I think this case has been going on and investigated for 10 years now. I think it'll be 10 years this Thursday or Friday since Crystal went missing. And all of us have kind of, saw things come out as the years progressed, but not too much proof-wise has come out that we've seen in the news and it's been leaked over the past 4 or 5 years. We were all sitting waiting for kind of a smoking gun, okay? We've all been waiting for that aha moment to say, gotcha, okay? And we didn't really get that. We knew from the beginning it was going to be a circumstantial case. There wasn't going to be a body, there wasn't going to be a weapon, but certainly I think we were still all waiting for that moment that really locked it in on Brooks Houck specifically. And, I am concerned that I don't know if the prosecution's done enough. I think they need to be worried about two things. Number one, they need to worry about, will the defense present a cohesive timeline to explain the events and the records, et cetera? And number two, they're going to have to, they're asking the jury to convict a person of murder, the highest charge in the land. That's a minimum of 20 years in prison up to life. And so, what they're doing, they're going to have to really tie together all 5 days of testimony if they're going to convict Brooks Houck.
You heard what Brian Butler said, the defense attorney said in the courtroom today. You need three things: a body, a crime scene, or a confession. And we don't even have a weapon. Add that to it.
Right. And I think he said it best. He said it wasn't for lack of trying, just lack of evidence. And, that was his big argument on the directed verdict.
So as you pointed out, nothing really new or groundbreaking is presented or collected since 2019.
Right.
Let's talk about where we stand at the moment. At the moment, if this were to go to the jury, who wins this case?
It's tough to say. I think at this moment, if it went to the jury, it's a coin flip whether Brooks Houck gets convicted. But, you know, for Joey Lawson, it appears they barely mentioned him, Doug. I mean, he's only been, and by the witnesses you did mention, they had no credibility.
To this point, what's the single most damning piece of evidence that you think is sticking in that jury's mind? Or evidence that has been said, obviously it's circumstantial.
I think that they say, hey, Crystal was with Brooks Houck, the last person she was seen alive with. And that's the most important thing that they need to focus on, the prosecution, and they can prove that, I believe, with phone records. In addition, then, that's where you kind of fill in that circumstantial case, everything around that. But that has to be the focus when they get up to close and say, Brooks Houck's the last person that saw her alive, and we know it from the phone records.
You have always been really specific about the importance of the phone records. We're going to get to that in just a moment, Nick. I want to talk to you about that. But first, we want to get the report on what exactly was laid out in court today from Shay McAllister, again, outside the courthouse in Bowling Green. And we are learning new details about Crystal Rogers' cell phone. Shay, new information we've never heard before about her phone usage. What did it reveal?
Today they had a witness take the stand who's an expert specifically in digital forensics, not from here. He's not a local investigator. In fact, he's from North Carolina, and the company he works for specializes in taking data usage from a phone and then making it into something that makes sense. And he'll answer specific questions asked of him by police or a prosecutor. So in this case, they wanted to know what was Crystal Rogers doing on her phone from July 3rd into July 4th. And this is what we figured out. Starting around 7:30 in the evening, she was playing games and then on Facebook, and then playing games and then on Facebook. It goes back and forth like that until 9:23 p.m. At 9:23 p.m., the device loses power. It shuts off altogether. The expert here told us that he did do some additional testing to ensure that it was a dead battery, not a manual shutoff, and he confirms that at 9:23 the battery died. At 11:57 that night, again, this is July the 3rd, the device powers back on and then is quickly, within seconds, manually shut off. And again, he confirmed he did some of that additional testing to know that it was a manual shutoff. Somebody pushed the power button to get that phone turned off. And at this point, he's asked specifically, was Crystal Rogers playing on her phone on July 4th after midnight? And he answers, no, that phone was not in use. He also looked at Brooks Houck's phone, but we didn't hear a lot about that. What we heard about Brooks Houck's phone was that there was no gaming apps on the phone, and it was connected to one certain Wi-Fi between 6 and 8. And then connected to that same Wi-Fi again between midnight and 2 a.m. And I believe that Wi-Fi that they're speaking of is at the home that he shared with Crystal. So between 6 and 8 p.m. and then again from midnight to 2 a.m. That question about whether or not there's games on his phone, the answer being no. And I think that's something that ties back to the storyline that Brooks Houck has said, that Crystal was on the couch playing games on her phone when he fell asleep at midnight. Today, it seems like that could not be true based off of this testimony.
You have followed the cell phone information so closely. We're talking specifically about the 3rd of July, Nick, and that's the date that she was last reported to be alive and seen.
No, she has
and now we're
I'm
coming right
up.
down to those specific time periods from 7:39 p.m. to 9:23. What does this say to the jury first? I'm always so curious. This is scientific evidence.
Right.
This case has been void of a lot of that.
It has, Doug, and so, you know, Mr. Hicks was the forensic analyst who testified today. Basically, you know, up till 9:23, she's on the phone playing. The question, Doug, that we have is what happened to Crystal between 9:23 p.m. and 11:57 p.m. on July the 3rd? Because we know the phone was turned back on briefly at 11:57, and so, you know, the question's going to be who can fill in those gaps? And obviously the prosecution's going to say, well, this is the time that she was murdered by Brooks Houck and the Lawsons were involved. But Doug, I'll tell you, I'm thinking that I'm expecting the defense they're going to have something to say. I know they're presenting a case, is my understanding, and it would not surprise me if they call their own digital forensic expert to fill in gaps for them to say, hey, look, this is what the phone records say in our analysis, and as objective as they look, filling them in, sometimes when you're dealing with triangulation and things like that, they still are an expert opinion. So, I would anticipate the defense calling some sort of witness to explain what was happening with those cell phone towers and how they read them.
The cell phone information in this particular instance of July 3rd really takes us down to a very personal moment, doesn't it?
Right. It does. It does. And, because I think even for her family and bless those individuals for having to deal with this, but really they heard today what she was doing at least up until that 9:23 moment. It has to be heartbreaking for them. They're thinking, oh, my mom, her daughter thinking, well, my mama was sitting playing a game on her phone for 2 hours like she always did when we hung out together, things of that nature. So I think it does make it personal, especially for the family, and I'm sure it hit home having to hear that today.
Then you add on top of what the judge had to declare from the bench today,
right?
The specific nature of saying, there is proof, enough proof of her death, reasonable amount here to rule that Crystal Rogers is no longer with us.
And people can talk about it all they want, but hearing and I've dealt with families that have had to hear a judge say that as well, and it's heartbreaking for them because it makes it more real. It really hits home, and it's like having to live it all over again, knowing that she's never going to come home.
We have more to go over. We now want to turn the case against Joseph Lawson. Of course, he's sitting there, folks, right in the courtroom, right next to Brooks Houck. Alexander Goldberg is joining us now. And Alexander, you were in the courtroom as we heard about Joseph's involvement and the heated fights that he had with his dad, Steve Lawson, who's already been convicted in this case.
Doug, right, the next three witnesses that I want to talk about have to do specifically with the Lawsons. Let's begin with Rebecca Greer. And to give you some context around her relationship with the Lawsons, she was married to Steve Lawson in 2017, which makes her the former stepmother of Joseph. She said that in 2019, she overheard a conversation between Joey and his girlfriend at the time, Elizabeth, also her daughter. Quote, I heard them talking about moving a car in $50,000. She then later asked Joey what was up with that conversation, and he said, yeah, but if you want to know the details, ask Steve. In a redirect, Shane Young had her reveal some more moments that we find out happened in the following months between the two Lawsons, both Joseph and Steve. Joey Lawson and Steve were both fighting over a household issue, and during the fight where we learn there was cussing, screaming, punches thrown, Joseph Lawson threatened his father, quote, if you keep going, I'll let everyone know about the car and your involvement. Moving forward here to the next witness. This is a woman named Stacy Cranmer, and she worked for Brooks Houck. She did insulation, she built decks, and she said that she observed something unusual between Brooks and Steve Lawson. They were driving around in a truck together for about an hour. She said she took note of that because Brooks never did that with any of his employees. She was also feeling anxious about one of the jobs that she did with the house. So she approached Steve and she asked if she was in trouble for a crack in the ceiling. Steve responded, no, that's not even what we were talking about. Quote, we were talking about a girl they needed to take care of. She wasn't doing well. She had 5 kids. So that was the testimony there from Stacy Cranmer. Of course, she was cross-examined there. Brian Butler and the defense counsel trying to poke holes in that story there. The third witness I want to get to is Barbara Coulter, the grandmother of Joseph Lawson, the mother of Steve Lawson, and this was one of the most interesting moments from the courtroom today. Shane Young, the special prosecutor, asked Barbara, did Joey come to your home and tell you anything about Crystal Rogers? She responds, yes. In the summer of 2022, he told me I needed to know Stephen killed Crystal. She said in response in this conversation, I said, Joey, if you're going to say stuff like that, you need to know it as a fact. It can lead to a lot of drama. Now, of course, in the cross-examination, we see some pushback on this. We hear that Steve and Joey had a love-hate relationship. Then, of course, we hear Robert Boyd, who is the defense for Joseph Lawson, question about that relationship. He says, well, wouldn't they frequently say awful things about each other? She replies, oh, absolutely. Doug.
Alexandra Goldberg, one of our two reporters in that courtroom with assigned seats covering this trial, now into its second week. But as we are joining you here tonight, prosecution resting its case today. That happened a lot faster than any of us thought. Let's pick back on Stacy, who she was just talking about. She dated Steve Lawson.
She did.
You're interested in her whole course and path toward secretly recording him.
Right. And in fact, my understanding is she was wired up by the FBI. They put a wire on her and had her have intimate conversations with Stephen Lawson, and really at no point in time did he ever admit anything that was really pertinent to this case. But the fact remains, Doug, is that is important, but it has nothing to do with Joseph Lawson. And again, we see them putting witnesses up really to try to pull Joseph Lawson into this, but it doesn't really implicate Joseph Lawson at all. And in fact, Joey, his grandmother, Barbara Coulter, who we heard Alexandria talking about, testified. I think the statement she made today in court helps Joseph Lawson. I told her, he wanted to tell her, Stephen killed Crystal. Well, that doesn't say Joey killed Crystal. It doesn't say Joey helped move a body. It doesn't say Joey helped move a car. You know, to me, that may have backfired a little bit on the prosecution.
Well, then here's Stacy asking him a lot of questions, too, about killing a lady with 5 kids. And he responded, well, no, I was talking about one of Joey's girlfriends. But does this raise enough doubt in the jury's minds that Steve Lawson possibly killed Crystal Rogers instead of Brooks Houck?
When that statement was made by Barbara Coulter, I had the same reaction in my mind. I thought, wow, you know, is the jury going to start thinking that Steve's the one who did this, who actually committed the murder, not just conspiracy, but committed the murder itself? So, you know, that was a dangerous thing for the prosecution to pull out there. Certainly, I'm sure they have a strategy with it, and there's a reason why they called her to the stand. But I still think that statement, it wasn't Joey Lawson saying he killed her, or even, oh, Brooks Houck killed her. It was Joey telling Grandma, hey, Steve killed Crystal.
As a defense attorney and a former prosecutor, the whole thing with Joseph Lawson has thrown you for a fit, and how his whole approach is sitting in there. Why is that? And what is it about how the approach to him has been handled in this that is so puzzling?
Well, you know, I don't. It's either puzzling or brilliant, one or the other. They waived opening statement. You never do that. It's only happened one time, and it was against. I was a prosecutor on the case, and the one who did it, he was found not guilty. So maybe it's brilliant. So essentially, they didn't give an opening statement. They were going to wait till the prosecution presented their cases. Doug, we've seen witness after witness after witness. I mean, I don't think they ask a question of 20-something witnesses, and they kind of sit back. But it's probably the intelligent move that Joseph Lawson was hardly mentioned in this case, and the times he was, it was by witnesses who had almost zero credibility by the time both defense lawyers were finished.
One other thing I want to talk to you about is the white Buick owned by Anna Whitesides, the grandmother of Brooks Houck. Right. They brought it here to Louisville 1 year after the disappearance of Crystal Rogers, and the case started widening. And they bring in a forensic scientist or with a canine cadaver dog, a dog specifically trained, we believe, right here to sniff the possible remains of a cadaver. And that the white Buick was sitting in the Louisville Metro Police impound lot here in Louisville in May of 2016. And the dog named Ranger apparently sat like he's trained to do if he smells possibly something that is curious or could be close to a cadaver. And the expert was saying, you know, can you still trust a scent a year later? And he said scents can last hundreds of years. Do you think that had much credibility today? Because they were really poking a lot of holes in him and his background and the dogs. Right.
And, you know, the defense lawyers really hit home about, hey, you don't have records regarding the dogs. I think they were lost at some point regarding, you know, how the dog has acted in other situations. You didn't have any video of this happening. But, you know, again, it's building that circumstantial case for the prosecution. There was a reason they called him, to say, look, you may not trust everything here, but now we have a guy that's bringing in a dog who's an expert in cadavers, and he's hitting on the car where a hair was found. And I believe, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, he hit on the trunk of that car. There's 20-something cars in the lot. The dog sniffs them all, goes to that car, and I think sits down or barks to hit on the car. And that's the same car where a hair was found that was similar in characteristics to Crystal Rogers. And the same car that was two raccoon hunters saw at the back of the Houck property on July 3rd.
So since this case is all circumstantial and speculative, let me ask you directly, how do you think that car was used? What was it used for?
You know, I don't want to speculate, okay? But at least if I was the prosecution, I would say there's a reason why that car was parked out there on July 3rd that night. There's a reason why there was a hair found in that car. There's a reason why that cadaver dog hit on that car, because that car was used in the murder of Crystal Rogers to take her away and dispose of her body.
Okay. Now, I want to answer some questions from many of you who have been watching our coverage, not only on YouTube, but the WHAS 11 Plus channel. They're asking a lot of questions about Rosemary Houck, the mom, and Nick Houck, the brother, unindicted co-conspirators. The big question out there, Nick, is are these two going to face charges after this case is over? Can they even be charged? They have been really a big focus and a centerpiece of a lot of this now nearly 2-week-long trial.
I do wonder, Doug, looking back, the prosecution didn't think, you know what, we should have charged both of them and had everybody tried together, because there has been so much evidence. But if I'm the defense lawyer for Brooks Houck or Joseph Lawson, you know, you argue to the jury, look, you know, if you think they're guilty, Rosemary Houck and Nick Houck, that's fine, but our client didn't do anything. The prosecution may have proved they did something, but our clients didn't. You know, I do wonder if they will be charged. I wonder if the prosecution is saying this is maybe you know, Stephen Lawson was the first test run, this is the second, and if they get convictions against Brooks Houck and or Joseph Lawson, they're going to go forward against Rosemary Houck and or Nick Houck.
Does the law allow that?
Absolutely. And you know, an indictment, the joke is in law you can indict a ham sandwich, okay? Which means you don't need much proof for an indictment. Now, to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what a prosecutor has to prove to a jury, that's a much higher standard. But just to seek an indictment to charge someone, you really don't need a ton of proof. You just need probable cause the crime was committed by that individual.
Was it smart of the prosecution to spend so much time talking about Rosemary and Nick Houck?
I think based on the theory that they had in this case, they came out of the gate saying Rosemary Houck and Nick Houck were involved in this. And now we did question why they even mentioned Nick Houck for quite some time. Then we heard about the white Buick, and that kind of brought him in there, and it made more sense why they mentioned. The only remaining question is, why didn't they charge him, or are they going to charge him regardless of what happens here?
So earlier today, Brian Butler said his line that you have to have one of those three things, a body, a crime scene, or a confession. None of those exist in this case. But then prosecutor Shane Young argued immediately that everything Brooks Houck said in his police statement was a lie. He said, Judge, we do have a witness, and he's sitting right there pointing to Brooks Houck.
But is that enough, Doug? And I don't know if it is. You know, they did systematically dismantle Brooks Houck's statement, piece by piece by piece. However, the defense did a good job of filling in the gaps and explaining why. And certainly, I would anticipate, beyond any experts that may testify over the next couple days for the defense, I would anticipate they may call witnesses to fill in those gaps, to explain more of that written statement, to explain more of the statement he gave to Detective John Snow, to give more plausible explanation and context and say, look, prosecutors taking this out of context, let us explain more. However, I will say, and I know you're going to ask me this, I do not think Brooks Houck or Joseph Lawson testify.
Well, even if they did, the prosecution's rested its case, you'd still have a chance to get in there and ask questions.
Oh, if either one of them testify, Shane Young is going to lick his chops and rip them apart piece by piece.
When Judge Sims said today, there's certainly proof of death in this case, what do you think the key things were that he may have been pointing to, in his mind, proof of death in this case?
Well, certainly. I mean, Crystal's been missing for 10 years. People just don't go missing out of thinner. And remember, Doug, early on in the case, we heard some questions from an expert that were out. Has her Social Security number been used? You know, anything with IRS records, things like that. Was there any proof that she was living somewhere else, or, you know, some sort of her identity being used anywhere else in the United States that we're aware of? And the investigator said absolutely not.
Let's take us down the road now. The defense coming out of the gate tomorrow. What kind of defense do you think is going to be laid out? You know those defense attorneys really well. They're very high profile in Louisville. They are heavyweight attorneys. Brian Butler, Steve Schroering, been around a long time. Expensive attorneys to hire. So where does this come out of the gate tomorrow as we're getting close to the 4th of July holiday?
A lot of what I anticipate is based on their opening statements. One of the things that Schroering and Butler came out of the gate did is they attacked the credibility of the investigation regarding witnesses. And what I mean by that is they said, look, these people were interviewed, didn't know anything about it, and then once the police promised them something, almost coerced them, they suddenly had an aha moment and knew about this case and had some facts to contribute. I think they'll probably call an expert about coercive tactics for police. That's not uncommon. Secondly, they have their own, both the Schroering and Butler and Coleman and Boyd have their own versions about the phone records. And we heard a little bit about that we heard a lot about it through cross-examination. I would anticipate both sides, either, I don't know if they do it collectively or they do it individually, will call their own expert in phone records and cell tower data and build their own narrative for a timeline. And I tell you, Doug, at the end of this case, especially when you deal with circumstantial cases, timelines are crucial. They are so important.
So they're going to build the alibi for Brooks Houck, or are they going to put more of a suspicion on the other players we've been hearing about already as possibly the killers of Crystal Rogers?
I think they're going to swing for the fences here and try to build an alibi for Brooks Houck and or Joseph Lawson with the phone records, the cell tower records, and have their own expert testify to that.
Originally, when the prosecution rested its case today, you thought, well, this could actually go to the jury by Thursday before the holiday. You still think that, or you're moving off that right now?
You know, I think it would either, I think the proof will probably be done. I'm assuming they're going to put on a pretty solid defense. And remember, Doug, the prosecution gets a chance to cross-examine all of the defense witnesses. So just because that witness testifies for one of the defense members, for either Brooks Houck or Joseph Lawson, prosecution gets to get up and have their own field day. And so I anticipate that's going to take quite some time. That's probably, and you have two different defendants, not just one. It's not like Stephen Lawson's case. We've got two different defendants, two set of lawyers. Really, they've been on the same team for the most part on this case, but they are each representing their client individually, so they're going to present their own defenses. So I anticipate that'll take a couple days. I could see this case getting to the jury by Monday.
Okay, so hold on, folks. It's going to be a pretty wild Wednesday tomorrow, as we're going to hear a lot more from those defense attorneys. That trial, again, resumes tomorrow morning in Bowling Green, Kentucky. We're going to have coverage for you throughout the day on our television newscasts on WHAS 11 News at noon, 4, 5, 6, and 11. And, of course, we're going to be back here tomorrow night at 9 p.m. for a deep dive on the day's proceedings with another 30-minute special for you here on WHAS 11 Plus. Thank you very much for watching.